Hey, welcome to Half the Battle. Today we're going back to the beginning, all the way to 1982, as we look at one of the original members of the first G.I. Joe team.
Meet Breaker, one of the first 13 Joes ever made. This toy is old. Really old. Well, for a toy anyway, for a human, 32 years is young. Anyway, this was the only toy Breaker ever got in the original line.
God damn it.
Well, actually, I'm lying, sort of. He did technically have two different toys. The first one, from 1982, had arms that could only move up and down, like all original figures. His 1983 version added a swivel joint, again like all other figures from the year. There is one more difference. His first figure had an enlarged crotch.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna sit back and let you guys snigger for a while. There. Did we all get it out of our system now?
Yeah, the original had a bulkier waist piece that was replaced with a slimmer version in 1983. Since the figures are so similar, I'm just gonna go ahead and treat them as one. This figure has all original body parts.
From a certain point of view.
Yeah, all Joes from the original 13, with the exception of Scarlet, obviously, shared body parts. For example, Breaker here has the same head as Clutch and Rock and Roll, just with a different hair color. But they all came out at the same time, so the parts are technically all original. I can really describe this figure with just one word. Bland. And that's about it.
Yeah, here's the thing about the original G.I. Joe line. It's iconic. It's historic. It's a very important milestone. It's also bland, brittle, and cheap. Very, very cheap.
Move this man!
Now, before you break out the pitchforks, let me explain.
Hasbro was cheap when it came time to produce these figures. It makes sense, really. I mean, this was an entirely new venture for them. That's why they only created a limited amount of molds for body parts. So most figures shared either heads or chests or legs. Most of them were bland since, well, they represented shrunk-down military guys. The only exceptions being Snake Eyes and Scarlet, and maybe to a lesser extent Flash and Grand Slam. And boy are they brittle! The thumbs on the figures are really easy to snap off if you put guns in their hands. And this straight arm breaker, well, I'm worried about snapping the arm off just by moving it. Anyway, Breaker here could have really benefited from some more paint applications, like on the grenade molded on his chest, for example. Having said that, I am glad that he got at least some paint, like the silver on his leg pouches. He did come with a nice accessory ensemble, though. A helmet, headset, and radio backpack that all fit together to make his communication getup. It's very nicely done, especially considering how long ago it was made. And it really helps with giving the character a much-needed, more unique look. Speaking of accessories, here's some trivia for you. Breaker was the only carded figure from this year that did not come with any sort of weapon. He could have really used a rifle or at least a pistol. But, you know, budgets were tight, both for the storyline and I guess military spending in general. And that, I'm afraid, was the only Breaker toy we got in the original line. Yes, we were once again robbed of even a single newer and better version of a classic toy. While at the same time, we were getting about half a dozen different versions of Snake Eyes rammed down our throat.
Unless you lived in some parts of Europe where things got a bit weird.
You see, in Holland and Belgium, the Battle Force 2000 character Knockdown was called Breaker, even though the rest of the file card information was still about a Knockdown character. This confused the hell out of me when I was a kid. With just one toy in the original line, I feel we should talk about some versions of Breaker that came out later.
And we start with the worst toy of Breaker ever made. From the worst line of G.I. Joe toys ever made. from the worst year in G.I. Joe history.
1997.
Yeah, 1997 beat out 99 as the worst year ever for G.I. Joe. And 99 didn't actually have any new G.I. Joe products. And this isn't just me saying this, folks. I have polling data.
And a big part of why 1997 was so reviled was the set the new Breaker toy was part of, the Stars and Stripes Forever set. Originally, this set was supposed to be a true homage for the 15th anniversary of G.I. Joe and a love letter to the fans. It was supposed to be a re-release of all 13 original Joes, with better plastic quality and a much improved paint job.
People were excited. Fans were really looking forward to this set. And then it actually came out and we realized that Hasbro had run in one or two teensy, tiny problems.
Instead of all 13 Joes, we just got 8. And instead of better plastic, we got cheaper plastic. And some of the toy molds were either lost at other companies or broken, so they had to use different body parts for some of the figures. And Breaker, well, he had all of these problems. Remember, the original intention was for the anniversary figure to be a better quality repaint of the original. Instead, well, we got this. Oh my god! It's like they're twins! How did they manage to capture the original Breaker's likeness and spirit so flawlessly? Yeah, this is probably the worst figure out of the entire 1997 line.
It sucks on so many levels, and let me take you through all of them.
Firstly, this guy looks about as much as the original as I look like Brad Pitt. Yeah, they lost the original head mold, so they just went with General Hawk's head, since they had that one lying around. Secondly, look, not even after having consumed several bottles of whiskey would I consider this to be a better paint application. For one thing, like with all 97 figures, his shoulder rivets aren't painted, which looks particularly out of place on Breaker, considering he has bare arms. For another thing, take a look at his wristwatch. Well, I say wristwatch, I mean it could just be a giant watch-shaped subdermal tumor, considering that it isn't painted. In fact, most of his details aren't painted, which is weird as hell when you compare and contrast it with Rock and Roll from the same damn set, who did have some lovely detailing. Oh, don't get me wrong, the Rock and Roll figure sucks donkey balls too, believe me, but look at all the extra paint applications on his chest and belt. And look, a watch with an actual paint job. And thirdly, this guy actually has less articulation than most G.I. Joe figures. You see, because of a baffling and completely unnecessary change in the ball joint for the head, they added a ring to it, he can't actually move his head from side to side more than a millimeter.
As far as his accessories go, well, there's problems there too. You see, none of them were actually individually packed with the figures. They were all in one plastic bag.
So we can only speculate on what thing went with who, based on the prototype picture on the back of the package.
But wait, you might say, Timmer, you ignorant yet handsome idiot! Breaker was the communications expert, so of course he's gonna get the radio or the transmitter or something.
Well, guess what, people? The set didn't actually come with any communications gear whatsoever. Instead, he's holding a laser rifle that belongs to Flash, a character that's not in the set, by the way. It's like he found himself on the battlefield without a radio, so he just picked up the first random weapon he found laying on the ground and went, "Good enough, YOLO!" Yeah, this is one of the worst goddamn G.I. Joe figures ever made. It's an insult to the fans, and frankly, if they couldn't get at least a little bit right, they shouldn't have included Breaker in the set at all. it fails on every single level. I'll go as far as to say that this is the worst toy I've ever reviewed on the show. And, I remind you, we've seen a ninja that would even stand out at a gay pride parade, and a guy with literally Play-Doh for armor.
You know what? I feel that I need to cleanse my palate after that gigantic piece of crap, so I'll finish by talking about a good Breaker toy.
Here's Corporal Breaker from 2008. He uses the new body style mold that all anniversary and movie figures now have. And he's a good homage to the original. While that is a nice thing, it also leads me to the only point of criticism I have of the figure. It's just as bland as the original. In fact, you can't get more generic army guy than this one. He does have extra articulation at the wrists and boots. This toy was released twice in the same year. Once in a comic pack with his communication getup, and once with a Ram motorcycle. Sadly, that version did not come with the communications gear. I really don't get it. I mean, would it have killed him to include it? Oh, and if you want to know why Breaker was included with a re-released Ram, well, that's because he happened to be featured on the original box art, and that's the only reason. Let me just wrap this up and give you my conclusion. The original Breaker toy is the best, while his 2008 version is a great homage. And it's about 1,000,000 times better than the congealed piece of raw sewage that was masquerading as an action figure from 1997. And you know what? As an original Joe, Breaker was an important character, so I feel he deserves more attention. That's why I'm making this a two-parter. Come back next week when we'll get to know the character better. We'll look at the file cards, comics, and cartoon. And we'll even take a brief look at the Breaker from the live-action movie, even though that's a completely different character, really.
See you next week, everybody!